Wendy Trapaga was born in 1981. Her parents had moved to Miami, Florida, USA in 1979 after emigrating from Colombia. Wendy was her father's favorite, whom he loved very much. When she was 6, the girl's life changed dramatically when her father tragically died in a plane crash. From then on, her mother was forced to work as a school secretary to support herself and her 2 children. Later, Wendy's mother remarried, and in this new marriage, she had 3 more children. As the eldest, Wendy had to grow up quickly, helping her mother care for her younger siblings. As a teenager, she began volunteering at an animal shelter for homeless animals. After high school, Wendy decided to pursue a career as a makeup artist and enrolled at the Miami Beauty Academy. In February 2002, at age 20, Wendy met Michelle Scott at the academy. Michelle was constantly surrounded by girls since most of the students at the academy were female and there were very few men. Arriving on his motorcycle, he would instantly attract the attention of many girls. In contrast, Wendy stood out with her modesty, which is what captivated Michelle and prompted him to get closer to her. Wendy enjoyed the fact that he singled her out from the others, which made her feel special. They began dating, and for Wendy, this was her first love. Michelle, who was 10 years her senior, seemed mature and dependable. He also had big ambitions. He dreamed of opening his own beauty salon and, eventually, a whole chain of them. His determination and self-confidence charmed Wendy. He promised to help her develop her potential as a makeup artist, and she believed that together, they could succeed in the beauty industry. A few months later, Wendy moved in with him, and then on October 10th, 2002, they got married and embarked on a 3-day honeymoon. The morning of October 14th, 2002, brought a troubling phone call. At 5:30 a.m., the phone rang in Wendy's mother Miriam's house. Feeling uneasy, Miriam picked up and heard the voice of her son-in-law Michelle, who unexpectedly asked where Wendy was. This question puzzled her because her daughter and Michelle were on their honeymoon and were supposed to return from their trip that very day. So, why was he calling? The last time Miriam had seen her daughter was at the wedding, and she had spoken to her the day before over the phone, and everything had seemed normal. Wendy had told her that they had returned from their trip to Key West, but hadn't yet arrived home because they had planned to spend the night at a hotel near the airport. Miriam asked Michelle what had happened. He explained that they had quarreled early in the morning at around 5, and Wendy had gone to her mother's. He had tried calling her several times, but she hadn't answered. Miriam asked him to inform her if there were any updates. However, his story seemed suspicious, so she decided to call Wendy herself, but her daughter didn't answer. Later that same day, at 6 a.m., a worker in the parking lot near a warehouse discovered the bloody body of a girl lying between the cars. He immediately called 911. When the police arrived, they found a lifeless girl whose face was so disfigured it was unrecognizable. Her face, neck, and head were covered in numerous injuries, and bloodstains on the nearby cars indicated the crime had taken place right there in the parking lot. However, the murder weapon was not found. She had a purse with documents in the name of Wendy Trapaga, and her car was parked nearby, though it contained no evidence. An autopsy showed that Wendy had suffered 20 blows with a blunt, heavy object, most likely a crowbar, and was strangled. Bruises were found on her neck. The cause of death was determined to be head trauma from the blows. The forensic pathologist determined that she had been killed between 3 and 5 a.m. A toxicology report revealed a high concentration of sleeping pills and painkillers in her system taken a few hours before her death, which explained why there were no defensive wounds. She had been unconscious and could not resist. Someone had drugged her, taken her to a deserted location, brutally beaten her to death, and then strangled her to ensure she wouldn't survive. The police officially notified both Wendy's husband and mother about her death. Michelle claimed to be devastated by the tragedy, but Wendy's mother was skeptical. Miriam had never liked her son-in-law. Michelle, 10 years older than her daughter, came across as overly arrogant, ambitious, and quick-tempered with aggressive tendencies. She couldn't understand what her beautiful, intelligent daughter could have seen in such a brazen man who even acted rudely in Miriam's presence. She had warned Wendy about the relationship, but the girl, in love, had ignored her mother's advice. Miriam was also unhappy with how quickly Wendy and Michelle had moved in together despite their financial difficulties, which forced them to rent a tiny apartment and sleep on the floor. Yet, despite these challenges, Wendy decided to take out a life insurance policy for $1 million, listing Michelle as the main beneficiary. Her mother couldn't understand why the insurance policy had become a priority for a couple who didn't even have children. However, seeing Wendy's happiness, she chose not to interfere. In September, Wendy shared the news of her upcoming wedding with her mother, despite being only 21 years old. Miriam and her husband insisted she delay the marriage, get an education, and gain some financial stability, as well as give their relationship with Michelle a chance to stand the test of time. But Wendy was eager to marry as soon as possible, as she was pregnant. Under these circumstances, Miriam had no choice but to agree and give her blessing. The couple married on October 10, 2002, although Wendy had no idea she was tying her life to a man she didn't fully know. It soon became clear that Michelle's past was far from spotless. He had previously faced legal issues. 6 years prior, he had participated in an armed robbery and was also involved in petty fraud. Michelle quickly attracted the attention of the police as the primary suspect. His motive, related to the insurance payout, was evident, so detectives called him in for questioning. He repeated a story the investigators already knew, that they had argued early in the morning about her supposed pregnancy, and Wendy had left, and he hadn't seen her since. However, this version of events was riddled with inconsistencies. The coroner's findings confirmed that Wendy had been killed before 5 a.m., making her appearance in the parking lot in the morning impossible, along with all the subsequent actions Michelle had described. Detectives offered the suspect to submit a DNA sample and take a polygraph, but he flatly refused. The investigation gained momentum. Detectives began carefully examining Michelle's phone calls and found that he had called his ex-girlfriend multiple times that night. Location tracking showed that both phones had been at the crime scene. The police called Michelle's ex-girlfriend, 28-year-old Yolanda Surrey, in for questioning. She claimed to know nothing about Wendy or her murder. Since the police had no direct evidence of her involvement, they released Yolanda. Instead of mourning his wife, Michelle immediately went to the insurance company for the $1 million payout. However, since the investigation was ongoing, the insurer refused the payment. Michelle, enraged and feeling cheated, filed a civil lawsuit against the insurance company, demanding the money. Wendy's family learned about this and decided to do everything possible to prevent him from getting the funds. By this point, they were almost certain that Michelle had taken Wendy's life for the insurance money. During this lawsuit, Michelle had to recount the events of that night, but often stumbled over his own testimony, which ultimately led to a criminal case being opened against him in 2005. Michelle was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He lost the lawsuit for the $1 million payout, and the money was eventually paid to Wendy's mother. Meanwhile, the police continued gathering evidence, convinced that Michelle was responsible for Wendy's death and that Yolanda had helped him, as they were both at the scene. Michelle continued to deny his involvement in the murder and refused to cooperate with the police, which prompted the detectives to focus on Yolanda, hoping she could shed light on the events. In 2011, they called her in for questioning again, showing her evidence of her and Michelle's correspondence discussing Wendy's murder. They also presented records of their calls that night and their cell phone locations at the scene of the crime. Seeing the evidence, Yolanda agreed to cooperate and began testifying. She revealed that when Michelle started his relationship with Wendy, he was still officially with her, Yolanda. For the past 2 years, they had been together, and she had a daughter from a previous relationship, whom Michelle treated like his own. They had met in programming classes he took before entering the beauty academy. They had lived together for more than a year, and Yolanda couldn't have imagined that while living with her, Michelle was secretly seeing Wendy. She and Michelle were already planning to marry, saving money, and building a future together. Michelle assured her that they just needed to wait a little longer, and their life would be stable. In July 2002, Michelle left Yolanda abruptly and without explanation and moved in with Wendy. Yolanda, left to fend for herself, was shocked, believing Michelle to be a stable, reliable person. But she soon discovered that Michelle wasn't what he seemed. At 30 years old, he lacked steady work, frequently changed fields, and was constantly looking for easy money. Yolanda felt hurt and angry when she learned Michel had left her for another. But she was stunned when he contacted her again and admitted he had married Wendy with the intention of killing her to collect the $1 million insurance payout, after which he planned to return to Yolanda so they could live comfortably. At first, Yolanda couldn't believe what she was hearing, but her love for him won out, and she decided to wait quietly until he carried out his plan. She was pleased to know that he still loved her and wanted to be with her, so she agreed to be part of his scheme. Initially, Michel and Yolanda planned to drug Wendy with sleeping pills or alcohol and drown her, making it look like an accidental death. However, this plan failed when Wendy noticed something strange in her drink on the last night of their honeymoon. Flustered, Michel turned to Yolanda again, and she sent him the money he needed to move forward with a new plan. On October 13th, he booked a hotel room near the airport, and Wendy called her mother, saying they would return home the next day. That evening, the couple planned to have dinner at a restaurant, go to a movie, and then visit a club. However, Michel had other intentions for the night. After dinner, they returned to the hotel, where he spiked her drink with pills that caused her to lose consciousness. Unnoticed by hotel staff, he carried her out through a side exit and put her into his car. By then, it was already night. They drove past Yolanda's house as they had previously arranged, and Yolanda, upon seeing Michel's car with Wendy inside, began to follow them. Wendy, unconscious, was slumped in the front passenger seat. Michel pulled into an empty parking lot behind a warehouse and, according to their plan, signaled for Yolanda to return later. When Yolanda came back about 20 minutes later, she saw Michel walking down the street. He got into her car, and she noticed blood on his clothes. In his hand, he held a crowbar, which he was wiping with a rag. They drove to a nearby river, where, according to Yolanda's testimony, Michel threw the crowbar into the water and washed the blood off himself. Yolanda stayed in the car while a patrol vehicle approached. Feeling a surge of fear, she explained to the officers that her boyfriend was feeling sick and that they had stopped so he could rest. The patrol officers believed her and left. Afterward, Michel changed clothes and threw his bloody clothes into a dumpster. Yolanda drove him back to his apartment, and then she went home. Later, Michel called Wendy's mother and asked if she knew where her daughter was. As he had promised Yolanda, he moved in with her after Wendy's murder, but their life together was far from happy. Michel became increasingly aggressive, threatening to kill Yolanda if she ever decided to testify against him. He constantly reminded her that she was an accomplice in the crime. Yolanda feared he might harm her the same way he had Wendy. Eventually, she ended the relationship, pretending it was to avoid being seen together in public, although she was also terrified of testifying against him. The police offered Yolanda a deal: complete immunity in exchange for her testimony in court, and they assured her that no charges would be brought against her as an accomplice. Under these conditions, Yolanda agreed to cooperate. The trial began in 2014, 12 years after Wendy's murder. Michel initially rejected legal representation, choosing to defend himself despite lacking any formal legal training or experience. During the trial, his statements were often incoherent, and the judge dismissed most of his questions as irrelevant. This enraged Michel, leading him to lash out at others in the courtroom, even threatening Wendy's mother and other participants. He was charged with contempt of court and given 30 days in jail. Later, he finally accepted legal counsel. At trial, Michel claimed he didn't know what had happened to Wendy. He argued that she supposedly met other men and had gone to a club alone that night, returning early in the morning. According to him, they had argued, and Wendy left. He suggested that she might have encountered some criminal in the parking lot who attacked and killed her. However, there was no evidence to support his story. Hotel staff had not seen Wendy leaving at 5 a.m., nor did surveillance cameras record her doing so. His story also contradicted the facts, as the coroner established that Wendy had been killed earlier and had taken a significant amount of sedatives and painkillers, rendering her unconscious. Under such conditions, she would have been unable to drive. The prosecution presented crucial evidence: numerous calls between Michel and Yolanda that night and their cell phone locations, which placed them at the crime scene. The two maintained contact and were near the scene of the crime, and Michel couldn't explain why he was there at night. He claimed he had never been there before and that the calls to his ex-girlfriend were supposedly related to concerns about her young daughter's health. But Yolanda refuted this. Another piece of evidence was a business card from the motorcycle shop where Michel had bought his motorcycle, bearing his fingerprints, which was found at the crime scene. How could it have ended up there if, as Michel claimed, he had never been at the location? The most compelling evidence against Michel came from Yolanda's detailed testimony about their plan. Although she hadn't witnessed the murder itself, she confessed to seeing the blood-stained crowbar. Divers later recovered the crowbar from the river. It matched the murder weapon, although the water had washed away any remaining evidence. Yolanda also revealed that the pregnancy test Wendy had taken had been faked. Michel had manipulated it to get her to marry him as quickly as possible. In reality, Wendy had never been pregnant. During the trial, Michel mocked Yolanda and tried to humiliate her. He argued that no sane man would ever choose to abandon a beautiful model-like woman like Wendy for an older woman with a child. He even accused Yolanda of killing Wendy, claiming she did it to eliminate her rival. Yolanda broke down in tears in court, insisting that the crime plan was Michel's idea, motivated by money. According to her, he hadn't mourned after Wendy's death but had immediately pursued the insurance claim. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Michel guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In addition, Wendy's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Michel in 2013. The court ruled in their favor, ordering Michel to pay $44 million to Wendy's family. However, he of course had no money to pay. This tragic story serves as a painful reminder that even when you are close to someone you trust, you can never be completely sure of their true intentions. Wendy's blind trust and love for Michel, her willingness to take risks for their relationship, and her desire to be with him clouded her ability to recognize dangerous signs. This case highlights the importance of caution, especially in personal relationships where blind infatuation can make one vulnerable. The story also reveals how a deceitful person, driven by greed and narcissism, can manipulate others using their vulnerabilities. Michel took advantage of Wendy's feelings, as well as Yolanda's fears and hopes, to carry out his criminal plan, which he eventually came to believe himself. It's a reminder that greed and the willingness to use others for one's own interests lead only to destructive consequences for everyone, even for the manipulator. It's crucial to remember that sincerity and devotion must be accompanied by prudence and sound judgment, as well as the ability not to ignore a partner's dangerous traits. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Trust, but always verify. Subscribe to my channel, as more intriguing detective stories await, where I unravel even the most intricate cases. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments. What struck you the most?